Okay.
So go ahead, Francis.
There, we'll use that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 20th webinar on the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. This webinar series is available on makara.us, as you know by now, under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress, as shown here. Previous episodes of this and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald, Secret Teachings, or Secret Doctrine. Okay. We ended our last session together with a deep dive into the meaning of Orpheus's lyre, or lyre, which is also called a forminx. MPH here tells us, quote, if the seven strings of the forminx be understood as representing the seven parts of man and the seven divisions of the human soul, then the whole study of harmonics becomes symbolical of inward adjustment. Well, he just opens up an enormous topic here. All things sevenfold can be included in this idea of attunement, right? So Curtis, in his Keys of the Universe, takes us even deeper into the lyre's significance. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, Martha, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted, it looks like.
Yes.
There.
Hi, everybody. We find a similar idea expressed in the Greek legend of the seven-stringed lyre given to Orpheus by Apollo. His father, Apollo, being the god of the sun or spiritual light, and the lyre representing the seven creative nature notes, or the seven color rays emanating from the seven planets, while Orpheus typified the animating principle or the light Christ force, which alone can draw divine harmony from the forces of nature. This is the quote, this is the hidden meaning of Apollo's heptachord, the lyre of the radiant God, and each of the seven strings of which dwelleth the spirit, soul, and astral body of the cosmos, whose shell only has now fallen into the hands of modern science. From Secret Doctrine, Volume 1. These notes represent lines of force emanating from the sun, one of which is picked out, focused, and concentrated by each of the seven planets, and again sent forth. I lost you. I'm sorry.
Starts, it is because of these. Can you find it?
There, it came back. Acting.
No, it is because.
It is because of these rays of force acting upon the seven sacred centers in man, which correspond to the planets, that the planetary forces affect man. Hence, man can sweep the strings of his golden harp in harmony only as he correlates with the sun force, the Christ within, and can listen, understand, and respond to the seven mystic notes only as he builds into his life and then I can't see the rest.
Planetary forces and rules them. Okay. Yeah. Okay, any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, Yvonne's got her hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Yvonne.
Why are there only 6 strings if this is supposed to be 7-stringed lyre?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, if you see pictures of this lyre, I've seen as many as 20 strings. It's just, the artist just starts drawing strings. And very commonly you'll see it shown as 4. I wouldn't put any stock in that, because often artists aren't necessarily aware of what the esoteric significance of what they're painting. Nonetheless, 6 can represent also the differentiated or outer expression, with the 7th being the synthesizing principle. So you have that, for instance, in these subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. And on each plane, you have one subplane, the top subplane, which holds the essence of that entire subplane, right? Like, for instance, you take the mental plane. So the entire essence of mentality is held in that first subplane, and then it breaks out or demonstrates through the 6 subplanes beneath it. So, so both things are true. The artists don't necessarily pay that much attention, or if they are, it could represent, as I described, the 7th being synthetic, thus invisible, right? Any other questions?
Yes, Joan says all the stars have 6 points.
Yeah, they're well. Okay, yeah. I don't know if there's any significance to that. You'd have to look into Edward von Inger's background to see how informed this representation is. I think it's a beautifully done classical piece, and it's really rare to find artists who are completely esoterically savvy and include their esoteric knowledge in their work. There are some, but most don't, or most aren't, especially when you're talking about things like mythology, where there's a whole school of thought that doesn't even embrace the esoteric interpretation. They see it all as basically, metaphors for the physical world, pretty arid way to look at it, but there you have it.
One thing that could be said in this painting is that the harpist is in fact the 7th chord, in a way, from the way he's poised.
I like that.
He's poised in a linear kind of a way.
That's right.
And the description below, the words below, is he's the correlating one, the Christ within.
Yes, I like that. The player is indeed the synthesizing agent, and so it would be the 7th. That's good. Yeah. And the 6-pointed star, is ever representative of spirit and matter overlaid, and that soul aspect that comes into being with that juxtaposition, often represented by the center point in a 6-pointed star, which is the 7th, right? So, yeah, good observation, Martha. Anyone else on this?
Yes, Britta has her hand up. Go ahead, Britta. You should be able to unmute yourself, Britta.
Okay,
There
maybe
you
now.
go. Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you count the spaces between the strings on the instrument, there are 7 spaces that correlate to the what we were talking about earlier.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to you guys are going right down into one of my favorite rabbit holes, which is really analyzing forms and shapes. I did a whole webinar series on this called Sacred Geometry, and that's basically what we did for that whole 25 webinar series, is analyze shapes and their meaning according to their numerical geometric values. So thank you for that. That's the hidden 7, and it's totally relevant. It's the hidden 7, right? Okay, anyone else? So Orpheus was clearly a fourth ray adept, right? Beauty and art and harmony, um, and 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 he was, he really was. He seeded the Greek mysteries. He's the one that, even though these are specifically Orphic mysteries, he was really the bearer from Egypt of the mystery school for all of it. And that would include the Eleusinian and the Bacchic, which we will be getting into next, maybe even the session. In fact, that's likely. Okay, finally, let's take a look at the source of this quote on Orpheus's lyre playing archetype Apollo. And so this is from The Secret Doctrine. And can we get a reader, please?
Yes, Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Those alone whom we call adepts, who know how to direct their mental vision and to transfer their consciousness, physical and psychic both, to other planes of being, are able to speak with authority on such subjects. And they tell us plainly, lead the life necessary for the acquisition of such knowledge and powers, and wisdom will come to you naturally. Whenever you are able to attune your consciousness to any of the 7 chords of universal consciousness, those chords that run along the soundboard of cosmos, vibrating from one eternity to another, when you have studied thoroughly the music of the spheres, then only will you become quite free to share your knowledge with those with whom it is safe to do so. Meanwhile, be prudent. Do not give out great truths that are the inheritance of the future races to our present generation. Do not attempt to unveil the secret of being and non-being to those unable to see the hidden meaning of Apollo's heptachord, the lyre of radiant God in each of the 7 strings, of which dwelleth the spirit, soul, and astral body of the cosmos, whose shell only has now fallen into the hands of modern science. Be prudent, we say prudent and wise, and above all, take care what those who learn from you believe in, lest by deceiving themselves, they deceive others. For such is the fate of every truth with which men are, as yet, unfamiliar. Let rather the planetary chains and other super and subcosmic mysteries remain a dreamland for those who can neither see nor yet believe what others can see.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions about this? We can see here the association with the 7 rays, right? But this is just a preview. MPH, Manly Hall, devotes an entire chapter of the secret teachings to the subject we're now taking a closer look at, right? The aspect of tone and color, right? The diatonic scale, et cetera, which we'll get to at some point. But let's see, back to the text. Also, let me just make a comment about this too, that especially at the time of the Greeks, there was a great need to draw a line between the general public and those who entered the mystery schools for their own protection, so that those who could possibly misinterpret the mysteries wouldn't present a danger to those who embrace them, right? So there was, it was a very severe punishment. I think we've gone over that in other mystery schools, that and still that punishment exists, at least in word, in the modern Masonic rituals, where they say you're going to be drawn and quartered and, boiled at a certain temperature for so long, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, this is all just symbolic. of the need for secrecy. It's less so these days. Of course, the actual secrets of initiation are something altogether different because, for instance, in the secrets of Apollo's heptachord is in truth the whole doctrine of white magic and the potency, the power that comes with that, right? And of course, that unfolds at the appropriate time. Okay, so now let's get back to the text, which we had started this paragraph last time, where we were analyzing the second last paragraph of MPH's section on the Orphic Mysteries. So Orpheus is one of the many immortals who have sacrificed themselves that mankind might have the wisdom of the gods. Orpheus's death is a significant part of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Given this, how can Orpheus be, quote, one of the many immortals? How do you reconcile that death and immortality? These two quotes from Morals and Dogma, I love this book, shed some light on the matter. This is like the bouillon cube that you put in your boiling water, Morals and Dogma. It's so concentrated and so full of innate truth. Notice that especially in this first quote, which is somewhat unpacked in the first quote, somewhat unpacked in the second. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes. Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Orpheus was connected with his destruction and his bones. Those valued pledges of fertility and victory were, by a beautiful contrivance, often buried within the sacred precincts of his immortal equivalent. But the death of the deity, as understood by the Orientals, was not inconsistent with his immortality. The temporary decline of the sons of light is but an episode in their endless continuity, and as the day and year are more convenient subdivisions of the infinite, so the fiery deaths of Phaethon or Hercules are but breaks in the same phoenix process of perpetual regeneration, by which the spirit of Osiris lives forever in the succession of the Memphian Apis. Every year witnesses the revival of Adonis and the amber tears shed by the Heliades for the premature death of their brother are the golden shower full of prolific hope in which Zeus descends from the brazen vault of heaven into the bosom of the parched ground.
Thank you, Greg. So this phrase refers to the myth of Phaeton, pictured here, who died after attempting to drive his father's chariot across the sky. He was unable to control the horses, the vehicle, and fell to his death. The Heliades, Phaeton's sisters, grieved for 4 months, at which time the gods turned them, the Heliades, into poplar trees and their tears into amber. So any thoughts or questions on this, these two quotes from Morals and Dogma? It's an important point, the juxtaposition between the seemingly merely mortal avatar and the immortal counterpart, right? Which is the source of that, both of that being who is the avatar, but more importantly of the doctrine that he brings forth, which continues, returns, it's unendingly, really. It's modified according to the age. Okay, so finally we have several authors have declared that the gods though loving Orpheus, feared that he would overthrow their kingdom and therefore reluctantly encompassed his destruction. All right. The idea that the gods are fearful or jealous or angry is an exoteric theme that recurs throughout the Greek myths, but invariably represents a blind, which both hides and can lead to a truer esoteric interpretation. But anybody of the stature of the fifth or sixth kingdom is absolutely and totally beyond all modes of what we think of as astral manifestation, such as fear and jealousy or anger, but you find it all the time. And so it's like a red flag, a place to take a closer look. Okay, let's take a look at the first half of MPH's final paragraph on the Orphic Mysteries. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please? You're muted. There you go.
Sorry. As time passed on, the historical Orpheus became hopelessly confounded with the doctrine he represented, and eventually became a symbol of the Greek school of the ancient wisdom. Thus, Orpheus was declared to be the son of Apollo, the divine and perfect truth, and Calliope, the muse of harmony and rhythm. In other words, Orpheus is the secret doctrine, Apollo, revealed through music, Calliope. Eurydice is humanity, dead from the sting of the serpent of false knowledge and imprisoned in the underworld of ignorance. In this allegory, Orpheus signifies theology, which wins her from the king of the dead, but fails to accomplish her resurrection because it falsely estimates and mistrusts the innate understanding within the human soul.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, any thoughts or questions about this passage? Orpheus himself proclaims his parentage in his hymn to the Nereids. This was actually written by Orpheus, of course, translated. I think it was by Olympidorius, who did the major translations. So remember, the Nereid was supposed to be one of the sources of Orpheus's. So could we get a reader for this poem?
Carrie, can you read that for us too, please?
Yeah, I can't. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yes.
Okay. To the Nereids, nymphs beauteous-eyed, whom sacrifice delights, give plenteous wealth and bless our mystic right. For you at first disclose the rite divine of holy Bacchus and of Proserpine, of fair Calliope, from whom I spring, and of Apollo bright, the Muses' king.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. So his parentage, as described in the paragraph, is from Calliope and Apollo. All right. MPH expands on the theme in the monthly newsletter earlier quoted, the theme of his parentage. So could we get a reader here, please?
Okay, I'll read it, but you might have to help me with one or two of these words here. It is generally written that Orpheus was the son of the god Apollo and Calliope, the muse of sweet harmony. Of course, this statement must be taken as allegorical. Apollo, as the Holy Spirit and light, is the father of truth and wisdom, and the parent of all the good things in the world. Calliope, as harmony and music, produces the vehicle for incarnation. Thus, truth manifested through music and the arts is Orpheus, revealed wisdom, perfection, made evident through appropriate forms and natures.
Oiagros.
Oiagros, king of Thrace, is usually given as the mortal father of the bard. What mortal woman is concealed under the name Calliope will likely never be known. She was probably a Thracian queen, and Orpheus was born of celestial and terrestrial powers. Such an interpretation of the story is consistent with the known practices of the Greek fabulists. It was openly declared that Pythagoras was the son of Apollo, that he was born of an immaculate conception after being conceived by a Holy Spirit. Pythagoras thus reflects the glory of his master Orpheus and is accorded a similar divine origin.
So you can see that if you have only an exoteric understanding of the mythology, the Greek mythology, that you're going to immediately become incredulous when you read that it was believed that Pythagoras was the son of Apollo, because it's not a believable statement. But if you have the philosophy in place, as is described, I think, quite beautifully here, Apollo as the Holy Spirit and light, as the father of truth and wisdom, then you can begin to understand the depth and potency of this form, of this Greek mythological form. Okay. Any thoughts about this before we go on? Next up, Orpheus is the secret doctrine, Apollo, revealed through music, Calliope. In an article from Horizon magazine, MPH expands on the idea of Orpheus as the secret doctrine specifically. So could we get a reader for this, please?
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
Certainly. The gods of the Greeks were merely personifications of ideals. The gods were the universe and its laws. They were not supposed to be individuals, were not to be regarded as divinities. They were no more than the symbols of ideals. Orpheus, revealer of the Greek traditions, had concealed the mysteries of the universe under this form, a pantheon of divinities. Various initiates of the old rites had then created fables, and these divinities appeared in such stories as the War of the Titans. And then a little pop-up comes and I can't.
Sorry. It should go away. It should go away in a minute.
It should go away in a minute. All right. War of the Titans, or the abduction of Europa, as a means of setting forth symbolically certain allegorical mysteries. Thus was constituted a secret cipher science for the decoding of the old symbolical writings in the language of the mysteries, cleverly concealed, in which was the history of the universe, the story of the human soul, and the exact knowledge for man of the process of the regeneration.
Thank you. This is really one of my favorite quotes, because it's a kind of key for all the mysteries, right? It's not just the Greeks. So all the mystery schools, if you take this into account, it's going to help. Whether or not we believe in specific deities as actual individual personas, that is, theosophically speaking, members of the fifth and sixth kingdoms, it's essential that we also recognize them as keys to the universal mysteries, or as MPH says, the symbols of ideals, right? That first of all, that's going to bring the key forward. And then, as I say, they may be indeed in individual deities, nexuses of great force and beauty and consciousness. But in terms of unraveling the mysteries, it's important that they're seen as symbols of ideals. All right. Now, MPH says no more than symbols of ideals. That's that radical understanding. I tend to believe that they are also personas, actual great beings, but that doesn't mean that Zeus, as this great being, was all lusty and chased a goose around, for his gratification. That's all symbolic of certain ideas that were being put forth. Very veiled, often very veiled, but nonetheless. I saw Greg's hand go up.
Yes, go ahead, Greg.
I was thinking about this quote here and what you just said here, and I mean, because it's not necessarily completely divine in its nature, and that there's a human quality to everything that we uncover in these teachings. My thought then is, are then these kinds of relationships to the deities more of a quality of a dispensation from hierarchy in a way that we can interpret and understand it from a symbolic and subjective way?
Yeah, well said. That's exactly right. Yeah, you could say, they're first of all, they're blinds and therefore often garbled. But if you have the key to the mysteries, and in order to absolutely have those keys, you would have to have gone through one of these mystery schools in the Greek mysteries. But nonetheless, having other keys, such for instance as modern theosophy, which teaches a lot, you can, and using your intuition, you can read certain myths and unveil their meaning. And we're going to be doing that in the next section, which is on Bacchus. In fact, we'll be parsing the myth and very specifically to describe just what it means. So we'll get a little practice at that. Thanks, Greg. That was a well said statement. Anyone else? All right. Next in the paragraph, Eurydice is humanity, dead from the sting of the serpent of false knowledge, that's the lower dragon, and imprisoned in the underworld of ignorance. HPB has an alternative theory on the meaning of Eurydice's death. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Lynn, can you read that for us, please?
The fable of Eurystheus pursuing Eurydice into the woods where a serpent occasions her death is a very plain allegory, which was in part explained at the earliest times. Eurystheus is brutal power pursuing Eurydice, the esoteric doctrine, into the woods where the serpent, emblem of every sun god, and worshipped under its grosser aspect, even by the Jews, kills her, i.e., forces truth to become still more esoteric and seek shelter in the underworld.
You can always count on HPB for an interesting interpretation. So both ideas have their merits. A third interpretation, remember, MPH says that she represents humanity, stung by the snake of ignorance, right? And here, HPB is equating her with the doctrine itself, right? And the third interpretation associates her with Persephone, the soul imprisoned in matter, ever seeking to be freed through the aegis of some solar god, such as Apollo or his emissary, Orpheus, hence their love affair. And, whenever you have a feminine aspect, a goddess, you're looking in an embodiment of an ideal, right? It's form aspect in terms of the esoteric codex, you could say, the, one of the devices that's universally used. Okay, next up, the second half of the final paragraph on the Orphic Mysteries. If you're interested and you weren't able to attend last time, you may want to pull it off of YouTube or a Makara and take a look. It's some fascinating material. Very, very, very fourth ray oriented take on the mysteries. Okay, could we get a reader, please?
Britta, can you read that for us, please?
Sorry. I'll try. The Zirconian women who tore Orpheus limb from limb symbolize the various contending theological factions which destroy the body of truth. They cannot accomplish this, however, until their discordant cries drown in the harmony drawn by Orpheus from his magic lyre. The head of Orpheus signifies the esoteric doctrines of his cult. These doctrines continue to live and speak even after his body, the cult, has been destroyed. The lyre is the secret teaching of Orpheus. The 7 strings are the 7 divine truths, which are the keys to universal knowledge. The differing accounts of his death represent the various means used to destroy the secret teachings. Wisdom can die in many ways at the same time. The allegory of Orpheus incarnating in the white swan merely signifies that the spiritual truth he promulgated will continue and will be taught by the illumined initiates of all future ages. The swan is a symbol of the initiates of the mysteries. It is a symbol also of the divine power, which is the progenitor of the world. Sorry.
Progenitor. Yeah, no problem. You nicely read. Progenitor. You know, the origins, you know. Okay, any questions about this passage? We've covered pretty much all the allegories that I've put in bold here. But the allegory of Orpheus incarnating as a swan is worth a closer look. In fact, the whole mythos of the swan is really fascinating. We'll close our brief review of the Orphic Mysteries with this overview of the swan's role in the mysteries from the PRS Journal, which is also an NPH publication. Let's divide this in half. Let's say the first reader go down to divine power of the Grail King, and then the second reader pick up from there.
Okay, let's start with Joan, please, and then Anne Veronica.
It is quite possible that much of the legendary around the swan originated in India. The ancient Hindus believed that the body of this beautiful bird was assumed by celestial beings when they wished to appear among human beings. The
Apsaras.
Yeah. Or celestial dancing girls of Indra's paradise were embodied as swans. And one of the ancient scriptures says that an early rishi, a divine sage, also took the form of a swan to bring a divine message to humanity. The Gandharva, or heavenly, is that correct?
Gandharva, yeah.
Okay. Or heavenly musicians also chose the shape of this bird when they wished to reveal themselves to mortals. Throughout this symbolism, there is a suggestion of the association of the swan with intuition or inspiration. The thoughts of heaven come to man in the likeness of this bird. In the Nordic rites and the legends of the early Gothic peoples, the Valkyrie, the warrior daughters of Odin, appeared sweeping through the sky, swan-bodied and crying their war chant. These Valkyrie are referred to as Odin's swan maidens. The chief of these was Brunhilde, whom Odin called his mind daughter. By poetic license, therefore, the swan-embodied Valkyrie were the thoughts of heaven, serving always the will of their lord. In the legend of Parzival, this young man, the guileless one, in his simple ignorance, kills with his arrow one of the sacred swans belonging to the Knights of the Holy Grail. This seems to mean that he blinded his inner perception or made false use of his intuitive powers. In another Wagnerian opera, Lohengrin, son of Parsifal, answers the cry of Elsa by appearing in a boat drawn by an enchanted swan, who is really the young prince of Brabant, who has been transformed into this bird by witchcraft. Here, the swan symbol seems to indicate a pure and innocent child who must be released back again into the estate of man by the divine power of the Grail King.
Okay, and a new reader, please.
And Veronica, yeah.
Among the Greeks, the swans were closely related to the muse or to poetry. When Orpheus was born to Pieces by the Ciconian woman, he resolved not to be born again of a human mother, but to be incarnated in the body of a swan. Orpheus, as the singer or the mystic poet reborn in a swan, further links the bird with the mystery of high verse. In the 17th century, England, and on the continent, the member of the Bacon's secret society were known as swans, the friends and companions of Apollo and the 9 Muses. The Pleiades and the French constellation of poets were also shown as 6 and later 7 swans. Shakespeare is referred to as the Swan of Avon, again tying the bird closely with the idea of inspired poetry. The Greeks held prose to be the language of men and poetry, the speech of the gods. Therefore, oracles were delivered in verses as arising from divine source. We still regard poetry as a highly prophetic, believing poets to be the first to gain insight into much matters, as will later be advanced by philosophers and statesmen. The comedy of Aristophanes, called The Swans, deals with initiation into the Lycian Mysteries, and the cries of the swans are said to announce the approach of danger. The swans deal with initiations into the Lycian Mysteries, and the cries of the swans are said to announce the approach of danger. This bird, with all its magical meaning, ever benign, suggests the flight of imagination by which man first perceives the meaning of the innumerable changes taking place in the mortal world.
Okay, a lot of ideas here, but we find common to all of them the idea of a vehicle for the sacred in some form, right? It's also, Theosophy teaches that often that when devas want to, these would be high devas, want to have a connection with our 3 worlds of human endeavor, that they can inhabit the body of birds. And of course, the swan would be a most likely candidate, being as beautiful as they are. So any thoughts or questions about this? A provocative subject. That's why I thought it was worth reading in full here. So it's, becomes clear why Orpheus would choose to reincarnate as a swan, right? Of course, again, it's just a symbol of this idea of being a vehicle for this particular potency.
The stories themselves communicate a quality of beauty that invites penetrating beyond appearances.
Doesn't it though? Yeah. Everyone is, takes you in towards spirit and the mystery of spirit. I saw some hands.
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's curious that Orpheus doesn't appear as a star or a planet or anything, and yet the swan does. And maybe that is there is a connection there between Orpheus
I like that.
and the swan. Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of thing that can be a blind, that in fact that is the incarnation, right? That's what's meant by him incarnating as a swan. I'm not saying that's true, but that's just the kind of thing that blinds do, right? Incarnating in, and he reincarnated as a swan, meaning that there is a direct connection between the source of this sacred being and that constellation Cygnus, right, which is the swan constellation. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's an example of a blind.
Yeah.
Yeah, good, Carrie, thanks.
Okay, and then Yvonne had her hand up next.
I had heard that when the angelic kingdom wants to incarnate into the human kingdom, they have through a couple incarnations in the bird kingdom to learn about gravity.
Oh, well, that adds to my comments. That's interesting to learn about gravity with that specific. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
And then Greg has his hand up. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was thinking about the swan, and I don't know if everybody's probably heard the more modern fable. I think it's modern, is that of the ugly duckling, and how the ugly duckling, after being accepted or something, is transformed into a swan. So there's a beauty inherent in the transformation itself, and that in one sense the flying swans, although they don't really fly, they don't have as ability to fly as other birds, but in any case I wonder if there's similar meaning in just that modern fable that we hear about the ugly duckling and how it is in the end transformed into a swan.
Yeah, well, essentially, if it's ugly, it's personality based. If it's beautiful, it's soul based. So the whole thing becomes a metaphor for the transformation into soul infused consciousness, right? And the becoming the true self, which is what better metaphor in the bird kingdom than being an ugly duckling and a swan. It's perfect for that. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Greg. It's great.
And then Yvonne has her hand up again. Go ahead.
Well, the ugly duckling was not a duckling. That's why it was ugly. It was really a swan. So it didn't transform. It was what it was to be.
It was what it was. That's
exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so the duckling was a swanlet. I don't know what little swans are called, but everybody probably mistook it for
cygnet, I believe.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting.
Cygnet?
I don't know. Yeah. I believe you though. Anyone else?
Yes, and Veronica, you got your hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say something else, but I just want to comment on what you said. It's a matter of false identification. They were thinking it of as a duckling, as we think our personality is our true self, and our true self is our soul. So when the duckling really evolved and growed into a swan, he understood that he was a swan, as we understand when we evolve and we grow, that we are souls and we're not personality. Just wanted to add to that, but I was thinking about poetry and the prose that I read. It's got rhythm and it's got vibration. Rhythm and vibration behind all of this. They're talking to us to put rhythm and vibration and high vibrations into our life. And that's how it comes down to us. It comes through rhythm and vibration, whatever we conceive. That's all.
Yeah, and that's, that is the method of attaining harmony, which is the fourth ray method of achievement, right? Of course, it's universal. It's not just fourth rays who use vibration, but they're cognizant of the fact, as was Orpheus, as a method, right? So yeah, thank you for that, Anne Veronica. Good comments. Anyone else?
Just one more
Britta,
thing.
oh, go ahead, Carrie.
Sorry. There's an Elizabethan poem which strangely seems to relate back to Orpheus, which is the silver swan who living had no note. When death approached, unlocked her silent throat. And then leaning her breast against the reedy shore, thus sung her first and last, and sung no more. And then she says, farewell all joys. Oh, death, come close my eyes. More geese than swans now live, more fools than wise. That's the poem, but I just wanted to point out that she was silent throughout her whole life, whereas Orpheus is not silent. And then his head is cut off. And then in order to silence him, and the swan,
but it doesn't work.
Actually, it doesn't work, no, but the swan, in the poem, the swan suddenly is able to speak. So there's a sort of connection again.
There is, yeah, I like that. Yeah, yeah, the throat is opened, and you know what a throat they have, huh? You know, if you're going to choose a throat in the bird kingdom, that would be the one. Yeah, the voice of Orpheus is actually transcended through, you know, the fact that it's, you know, the lungs are disconnected, so it's no longer a physical voice. Nonetheless, it becomes the voice of the higher realms, you could say. You know, it's the voice of prophecy. Anyone else?
Britta, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, maybe. The Ugly Duckling is written by the Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen, and I'm from Denmark, so I know that. And the story is shortly that the egg of the swan was placed by some mistake in a duckling's nest.
Oh, beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, and then he grew up amongst ducks, which he couldn't correlate with. He doesn't felt at home. And then after a year, he grew up and met some of his swan families and saw his mirror in the water. And then he found out that he belonged with the other family.
Oh yes,
So
you know, you're bringing it all back. I remember reading this at some point.
And he and I have always thought of this story as many people are born in some circumstances that doesn't fit. They doesn't fit or work together, and then suddenly, when you reach a certain stage, you find out who you really are yourself.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You know, that makes it a fabulous teaching story for anyone.
Yeah, and that's what Greg was talking about a bit some time ago. And another thing I would like to say is that in Denmark, about 20 years ago, we had a voting quite of the state ministry asked all people in Denmark to vote for which bird they thought should be the state bird for Denmark, and guess which bird won?
Well, I hope it's not the ugly duckling.
No, it's the swan.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. You know, I watched a series, I can't remember the name of it, about a female prime minister. Do you know that series? It's
yes,
Danish. Yeah. I watched the entirety of that series, and I was really enchanted by it.
Yeah, it's called
Borgen.
Yes, exactly the one. Yeah.
What is it?
Borgen.
Morgan.
Yes.
Yeah, Morgan.
Like Morgan, but with a B.
It's
Borgen, right? Borgen,
it's
right?
it's the same as parliament in English.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I found it fascinating on a lot of levels, and
Yes.
the fact that she, chose the higher path, and in the end, was really
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Anyway, but I don't want to
But-
leave everybody else.
Okay.
Yes, this you brought forth an important detail, which is the idea of the displacement of the egg, right? Well, the soul is displaced every time it's born through into the human
Yeah.
kingdom. And that's the universal aspect of this story. In that, we have to rediscover, our true nature. But thank you for that. And bringing forth the real story. Yeah. Okay.
And then, there's
Go ahead.
one more comment from Anne Veronica. She says, don't swans sing a beautiful song before they die?
Swan song.
Yep.
Yeah, that's his swan song. They must, because otherwise, how could swan songs have gotten their name? Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and you just feel that, this barely scratches the surface, that you could really dive into this, and it would reveal a lot. Like, for instance, the connection with the Gandharvas, and the swan maidens. Each one of these myths is going to reveal that much more about their nature. Yeah. That's going to have to do for now. So any final thoughts before we go on the Orphic Mysteries? It's a wonderful school. Like I said, Orpheus, very fourth ray. Orpheus himself brought the mysteries to all the schools. He's considered you could call him the root master, really more like an avatar or adept that informed all the other Greek masters and brought in this great teaching, right? Which manifested in at least three major schools. The Eleusinian, by far the most famous and affected the most people, the Orphic Mysteries, and the one that we're now going to be looking at, which is the last segment of this chapter, the Ancient Mysteries and Secret Societies, Part 3, entitled The Bacchic and Dionysiac Rites. So Bacchus and Dionysos are the same person. They're used interchangeably, right? So could we get a reader for this first paragraph on this new mystery school? This is a fascinating one. It's amazing stuff.
Martha, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. The Bacchic and Dionysiac rites. The Bacchic rites centers around the allegory of the youthful Bacchus, Dionysos or Zegrios, being torn to pieces by the Titans. These giants accomplished the destruction.
Oops, we lost you.
By causing him to become fascinated by his own image in a mirror. After dismembering him, the Titans first boiled the pieces in water and afterwards roasted them. Pallas rescued the heart of the murdered god, and by this precaution, Bacchus, Dionysos, was enabled to spring forth again in all his former glory. Jupiter, the demiurgus, beholding the crime of the Titans, hurled his thunderbolts and slew them, burning their bodies to ashes with heavenly fire. Out of the ashes of the Titans, which also contained a portion of the flesh of Bacchus, whose body they had partly devoured, the human race was created. Thus, the mundane life of every man was said to contain a portion of the Bacchic life. For this reason, the Greek mysteries warned against suicide. He who attempts to destroy himself raises his hand against the nature of Bacchus within him, since man's body is indirectly the tomb of this god, and consequently must be preserved with the greatest care. Wow.
Okay, yeah, thoughts or questions about this? The Bacchic myth is particularly gruesome, but also brilliantly metaphorical, as we'll come to see. In fact, without going any further at all, because the next section is to explore this myth a little more deeply, let's just have a little exercise. It's take any piece of this myth, any detail, and see if you can determine a possible actual meaning or higher meaning, what it is a metaphor for. Now, if you know the story and you know what it all means, well, that's fine too. You could speak up too, but no, that's fine. So just, take any detail, and what I want to develop is to enable that part of you that stays alert as you're reading mythology, which actually would even serve you as you're reading the evening news, because it's in a sense all a myth for a higher reality. But these are crafted to carry very specific teachings. So do we have any takers? Anybody want to give it a shot?
I should raise my hand.
Yeah, you should. Hey, we got a bunch.
Go ahead.
You were the bravest, Martha, so you get to go first.
I'm sorry. I will develop. I will try to become more courteous.
You'll develop circumspection. Yeah, okay.
I hope so. The issue that I thought about is that the understanding of desire. They tricked him by getting him to become fascinated by his own image,
Yeah.
and that kind of limited preoccupation, he became vulnerable to being killed.
Yeah.
The other thought was that Bacchus was a youth. That would account. It makes sense to me why they might use this to caution against suicide. He didn't have enough time in his lifetime to sort of develop beyond himself.
Good. Anyone else? Let's just, just
Yeah.
thumbnails.
We have several hands up. Lynn, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
So after dismembering him, to me, that means shattering his illusions or his glamours about who he was, and then boiled the pieces in water certainly pertains to the astral waters. And after
That's interesting. Yeah, I like
roasting
that.
them, the fire, the burning fire. So there was a purification that was going on through that.
That's very interesting. Yeah. And of course, we also have, since you brought up the astral, you have the fires of the mental. Good. Yeah, good ideas. Someone else.
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
His own image in the mirror is perhaps an attempt to look at the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then the dismembering is, of course, the physical body. And as the last speaker just said, the water is the astral body and the roasting is the mental body.
Yeah,
So
I think
it's
there
going
is
through the
something
whole
to it.
process.
Yeah, even though, none of the interpreters that we're going to be looking at, because this has been deeply parsed, and I think you'll enjoy what they come up with. But interestingly, none of them brought forth that triplicity, of the physical, astral, and mental, which is one of the reasons we're doing this. Because if you immediately get engrossed with, expert, quote unquote, interpretations, then you may miss something, by not going through the process yourself. And learning to do this is every bit as important as having some awareness of what other people have done. Okay.
And Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, when I thought of it, the primary allegories that came up to me were the burning fires, and that out of the ashes of the Titans there was a portion of the flesh of Bacchus, and that the origination of humankind has thus been born out of the ashes of Bacchus. So that was really key for me in terms of that we're all phoenixes. Phoenix is
Yeah,
in our own right, and that we're all being reborn and rebuilt into a higher form. And then also, it also brought remembrance or thoughts about the story of Chiron and his being burnt and turned into a wounded healer. But it was his sacrifice, at which point he said that basically made him immortal, that he sacrificed everything in the burning ground, and that we're all in many ways have to deal with our own burning grounds, which is in part
That's
our
great.
own personality being transformed in
Yeah,
service to the greater soul.
there you go. That's, yeah, good stuff, Greg. Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like to chime in. Pretty much everything everybody else has said, but along with that, these giants accomplished the destruction of Bacchus by causing him to become fascinated by his own image in the mirror. I think is an allegory for us becoming attached to the body, which is not the real us. And then once he was dismembered, Pallas rescued the heart, which is the soul, the part that will come back. That was what I thought of when I.
Yeah, and if you're a theosophist, we know that the silver thread of life attaches to the heart, and you can kill the body and snap the thread, but you can't kill the continuity of life. Yeah. Great.
And then Yvonne has her hand up. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Well, you said just about what I was going to say. The Pallas rescued the heart, and someone just mentioned that's the life thread. The consciousness thread is in the head, and then so this was enabled him, like she said, it's the soul, and to have reincarnated again and again. So BL said basically what I was going to say.
Okay. Anyone else? I see.
Yes, and Veronica, go ahead.
Well, actually, I was going to say the same thing that BL said, that the mirror is for me the astral plane. I think that the last words here are just beautifully said that Bacchus is the nature inside us. In the cosmic fire, it says that all the elementals in our bodies learn through our path and through our learning. So when one cuts the thread of life, cuts their path of learning, and they get very angry, nature is a blind force that retributes when you cut this thread of life before its time.
And that relates to the warning against suicide.
Yes, it's beautifully said. He who attempts to destroy himself raises his hand against the nature of Bacchus within him. Since man is indirectly the tomb of this god, and consequently must be preserved with the greatest care.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pull the plug on it. I'm sure that everyone has an idea, but that might have been it, or maybe not. But let's go ahead. Let's take a look at a more in-depth, and you can see this is now graphic, a more in-depth version of the myth. This is from the first volume of Joseph Campbell's 4-volume Mass of the Gods. He was a great scholar on such things. And so he parses the actual myth a little bit more. And you can see here, in these, this was really early illustration, 1561 to 1566. And you can see that it's sequential, that it starts with the Titans tearing this little Titan apart. And then the resurrection is this. Here's Pallas Athena drawing the, resurrected youth. Notice the little horns. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so could we get a reader for this?
Okay.
Start here and then go over here.
Okay, I'll do it. When the great goddess Demeter, we are told, arrived in Sicily from Crete with her daughter Persephone, whom she had conceived of Zeus, she discovered a cave near the spring of Cyane, where she hid the maiden, setting to guard her the two serpents that were normally harnessed to the maiden's chariot. And Persephone there began weaving a web of wool, a great robe on which there was to be a beautiful picture of the universe, while her mother, Demeter, contrived that the girl's father, Zeus, should learn of her presence. The god approached his daughter in the form of a serpent, and she conceived of him a son, Dionysos, who was born and nurtured in the cave. The infant's toys were a ball, a top, dice, some golden apples, a bit of wool, and a bull roarer. But he was also given a mirror, and while he was gazing into this delighted, there approached him stealthily from behind two Titans, who had been sent to slay him by the goddess Hera, the jealous wife and queen of his father Zeus. And they were painted with a white clay or chalk. Pouncing upon the plain child, they tore him into 7 parts, boiled the portions in a cauldron supported by a tripod, and then roasted them on 7 spits. However, when they had consumed their divine sacrifice, all except the heart, which had been rescued by the goddess Athena, Zeus, attracted by the odor of the roasting meat, entered the cave, and when he beheld the scene, he slew the white-painted cannibal Titans with a bolt of lightning. The goddess Athena thereupon presented the rescued heart in a covered basket to the father, who accomplished the resurrection, according to one version of the miracle, by swallowing the precious relic and himself then giving birth to his son.
Okay, thank you, Biel. Any thoughts or questions? You can see this is an expanded version. Campbell being a great scholar of mythology and would have done extensive research in terms of reassembling the entire myth. So notice though that he doesn't give any particular interpretation, not at this point. This is just an expanded version of the myth. Okay,
Francis,
yeah.
Sorry, I just noticed a little inconsistency. In this story, it's talking about Athena rescuing the heart and Zeus restoring her. But the caption on this picture says, restored to life by Rhea, who is a Titan and the mother of Zeus.
Yeah, and there's also those who believe that it's restored by Minerva, who is the higher aspect of the soul in esoteric thought. This is a what you have to do here is go to the principle involved, right? So it's the feminine cohesive principle that is capable of this kind of magical restoration. Right. Let's see. What does he say it is? By who does it?
He actually says Zeus. He says Zeus is the one who, Pallas Athena rescues the heart, and Pallas Athena does equate to Minerva. And then it says Zeus is the one who restores him. By eating. But again, it's just different versions of the myth, different right
And
interpretation.
what you want to do is find the common thread. And, Zeus's restoration is going to be that it is the unity, the source of divinity, that is the restorative quality, right? So you could say Zeus, which is divinity, working through whatever means, in this case, whatever goddess is always present, in this work. That's esoterically speaking.
And Rhea represents the mother figure. But again, she was actually a Titan. And they were the ones, and they were the ones who, she was the queen of the Titans, her and Saturn. But anyway, it's a mother figure.
Yeah, and this is not necessarily consistent. Of course, you have two very different sources here. This is the name of this illustration by Taddeo Zuccaro, so you're not going to find universal consistency, and you have to look at that and parse as to why that's true. The relationship between the mother of the Titans and Bacchus, who is himself a Titan. It's the highest aspect of the Titanic existence. It then makes that consistent. That, by the way, is one of the reasons for the horns. It is the Titanic existence, which is physical reality. And so since you're reassembling that aspect, then from one point of view, you could see it as consistent with the idea that Rhea would be doing it. But I have a very limited overview of all aspects of Greek mythology, so I can't really address that directly. Anyone else? Okay. See, let me catch up here. Okay. Before we get into an analysis of the myth, well, too late for that. Let's take a look at the text accompanying the large illustration at the top of page 31 of the folio edition of this book. MPH entitles this passage "The Processional of the Bacchic Rites." This illustration, however, originally appeared in the 1600 edition of Ovid's Metamorphoses, where we discover the title of the illustration itself to be "The Triumph of Bacchus and Death of Pentheus." The dead Pentheus, whose crime was that he spied uninvited on the rites, can be found in the bottom left corner. You can see it set off there in the left bottom. Ovid was a Roman poet who penned the Metamorphoses in 8 AD during the life of Christ. He could not have known that Jesus was about to reenact a form of the great mystery that was the subject of his epic poem. So we'll need just get a reader for this. This section is 2 readers, but just a reader for this, please.
And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
One moment, please. Okay. In the initiation of the Bacchic Mysteries, the role of Bacchus is played by the candidate who is set upon by priests in the guise of the Titans, is slain and finally restored to life amidst great rejoicing. The Bacchic Mysteries were given every 3 years, and like the Lucinian Mysteries, were divided into 2 degrees. Sorry, one moment. The initiates were crowned with myrtle and ivy plants, which were sacred to Bacchus. In the Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins conclusively established Bacchus Dionysos as one of the early pagan forms of the Christus myth. The birthplace of Bacchus was called Sabazios or Sabaoth, was claimed by several places in Greece, but on Mount Zelmios in Thrace, his worship seems to have been chiefly celebrated. He was born, sorry, I can't see because, okay.
He was born of a, by the way, I want to interject here. If you're willing to go to the little down arrow on this, on the video, you can, well, I'll just say this. You can find a way to move that strip that is blocking your view, and I know often blocks others of your view. I've moved it to the top of the video where there's almost never any text, and so it'll stay out of your way. Now, I don't want to get into, you know, I don't want to interrupt this with technology.
I'm on my computer, I can deal with this, but this I'm on the phone and it comes and it goes. I'll try my best.
Yeah, well, exactly. And there may be nothing you could do on the phone. It may have more limited options in terms of changing things around. I thought you were probably on the phone. Anyway, let's see. Are you able to continue, or shall we go
I
on?
think because I will spoil it. It's a pity.
Okay, he was born. He was born. Okay, so what he's talking about here is the connection with Christianity. He was born of a virgin on the 25th of December. He performed great miracles for the good of mankind, particularly one in which he changed water into wine. He rode in a triumphal procession on an ass. He was put to death by the Titans and rose again from the dead on the 25th of March. He was always called the Savior. In his mysteries, he was shown to the people as an infant is by the Christians at this day on Christmas Day morning in Rome. Okay. See, let me catch up. All right, there's much to be said about this. It's, you know, the Bacchic rites obviously predated Christianity, and we've seen, you know, time and time again examples, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's go ahead and finish the reading. This is from the same piece. Reader, please.
Lynn, can you read that, please?
The bottom is cut off, but I'll try reducing it and see if I can read it then. While Apollo most generally represents the sun, Bacchus is also a form of solar energy. For his excuse me, resurrection was accomplished with the assistance of Apollo. The resurrection of Bacchus signifies merely the extraction or disentanglement of the various parts of the Bacchic constitution from the titanic constitution of the world. This is symbolized by the smoke or soot arising from the burned bodies of the Titans. The soul is symbolized by smoke because it is extracted by the fire of the mysteries. Smoke signifies the ascension of the soul, for evolution is the process of the soul rising, like smoke, from the divinely consumed material mass. At the time of the Bacchic rites were of a high order, but later they became much degraded. The Bacchanalia or orgies of Bacchus are famous in literature.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so the central event in the Bacchic rites was the ritual slaying and the resurrection of the initiate representing Bacchus. And he was slain by the priest playing the part of the Titans. Bacchus represents the rational soul of the inferior world, not unlike his mother Persephone in the Eleusinian mysteries. In both cases, they are resurrected through the solar principle, Persephone by Mercury, Bacchus by Apollo. By this point in our studies of the mysteries, it should come as no surprise that the Bacchic rites informed the later Christian doctrine. for we've seen these similarities portrayed in all the mysteries we've studied so far. The Druids revered the 25th of December, like in the Bacchic Mysteries. Balder, the Norse Christ, was betrayed and slain to be resurrected at a future time. And like Jesus, Mithras was worshipped as the Son of God. We can get a sense of just how much the mystery school influenced Christianity, at least up to the time of Theophilus. From paintings on the ceiling of a catacomb in Rome. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Greg, can you read that for us, please?
Yeah, this illustration shows an early Christian painting from the ceiling of the Domitilla catacomb in Rome, 3rd century AD. In the central panel, where a symbol of Christ might have been expected, the legendary founder of the Orphic Mysteries appears, the pagan poet Orpheus, quelling animals of the wilderness with the magic of his lyre and song. In 4 of the 8 surrounding panels, Old and New Testament scenes can be identified. David with his sling, upper left, Daniel in the lion's den, lower right, Moses drawing water from the rock, Jesus resurrecting Lazarus. Alternating with these are 4 animal scenes, 2 exhibiting among trees the usual pagan sacrificial beast, the bull, 2 the Old Testament ram, and that's from the Mass of God.
Thank you. Great. Okay. MPH will expand on this statement. The resurrection of Bacchus signifies merely the extraction or disentanglement of the various parts of the Bacchic constitution from the titanic constitution of the world. In the second paragraph of the main text, the Bacchic/Titan polarity represents spirit enmeshed in form. Thomas Taylor, quoting Olympodorus, takes a deep dive into the idea that smoke signifies the ascension of the soul from the form aspect. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Yes, Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
Let us now consider the latter part of the fable, in which it is said that our souls were formed from the vapors emanating from the ashes of the burning bodies of the Titans. It is necessary, first of all, for the soul to place a likeness of herself in the body. This is to ensoul the body. Secondly, it is necessary for her to sympathize with the image as being of like idea. For every external form or substance is wrought into an identity with its interior substance through an ingenerated tendency thereto. In the third place, being situated in a divided nature, it is necessary that she should be torn in pieces and fall into separation, incarnation, till, through the action of a life of purification, she shall raise herself from the dispersion, loose the bond of sympathy, and act as of herself without the external image, having become established according to the first created life. We see this very progression described in the myth. For Dionysos or Bacchus, because his image was formed in a mirror, pursued it, and thus became distributed into everything. But Apollo collected him and brought him up, being a deity of purification and the true savior of Dionysos. And on this account, he is styled in the sacred hymns.
Thank you. So any thoughts or questions about this? Pulls back another layer on the cover on this mythology. Of course, Thomas Taylor was a highly intuitive Greek scholar who wrote in the 1790s in that area, and before the theosophy had come back into being. And it was extraordinary in his understanding of anything he had analyzed. So it's always one of the go-to sources. Okay, we'll consider the Bacchanalia later in our study. let's take a look at an esoteric analysis of the rite itself from Richard Payne Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology. But, you know, before we do that, we kind of rushed by this. Is there any thoughts or questions about this analysis, interpretation of the myth? Anybody have any thoughts about this?
Greg's got his hand up and Martha kind of rose to the top like she wanted to say something. Did you?
Sorry. No, I'm gonna
Okay.
do it right.
Okay, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, one of the things that I may have learned in either the Arcane School or in Church Universal Triumphant was this concept of out-picturing yourself, in the sense that we all strive as souls and beings on a journey to reach the most diamond aspect of ourselves, the highest beauty that we can become. And we do that through the out-picturing of ourselves. So we start with an initial image, which is, in this sense, could be directly related to this concept of Bacchus and the mirror image of himself that was just given to him. And then we try to grow and strive beyond that into a higher perception of ourselves, so that we all, the highest expression of our soul process is to what we call out-picture ourselves.
Right. Yeah, it's use of the creative imagination, which, you know, in DK constantly describes the importance of use of, as you call, out-picturing, you know, which is another way of describing use of the creative imagination, right? And I can see, you know, your idea is in terms of the connection with the mirror. However, in this case, the mirroring actually takes him into form, because he ensouls the likeness, because Bacchus is actually starting, you know, when he's a child in playing with his toys, he's not yet informed, and he's therefore that's not obvious by the myth, but it's universal interpretation, is that he then goes into form or ensouls the image of himself by looking at a mirror, thus making himself vulnerable, right? And of course, it's all part of the plan, because this is one of the, quote, toys given to him by his father Zeus. It's just part of how things unfold. Thank you for that, Greg. Anyone else on this? You know, it's so marvelous analysis here. For every external form or substance is wrought into an identity with its interior substance through an in-generated tendency thereto. That's the looking in the mirror part, right? It's in-generated, right? Yeah. And it's through that having created a divided nature that then can be torn to pieces. But we'll get into further analysis. Let's hope we were here and then here. Oh, I see another raised hand.
Yeah, and Veronica, go ahead.
Yes, I have read all the Greek mythology. Well, the time that I read it, it was a whole volume. I didn't have this interpretation, this esoteric way of interpreting things. I don't know the myth of Bacchus. What hit me is the similarity with Christ and the story of Christ, that he was on a donkey, that he healed people, he was worshipped, and there's so many symbols in the story. The donkey, I remember that the donkey is the symbol of cancer. It's the two tails of a donkey, as it's said in the labors of Hercules, and all his toys, they must be symbols.
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
I just haven't got, I don't remember them all to start thinking what are these symbols and why were they given them to him. But it struck me very much how it was very similar with the story of Christ. It's the same story, really.
It is, and it was, which came first? That's always a good thing. In fact, this so troubled some of the church fathers that they created this doctrine where they said that Satan went back in time and emulated the coming Christ story in earlier myths. Talk about stretching for an explanation. That's a stretch. But yeah, you'll find that just about every aspect of the story of the Christian unfoldment, as given in the New Testament, has some mirroring in the mythology. Just about every aspect of it you can find. Right now, it's interesting. What do you do with that? You could say, well, does that mean that the Christian story is untrue and they just stole all these elements? Or you can say, and this is what I prefer to believe, which is that these are universal metaphors that every time an avatar comes into being, and they literally physically recur because of the potency of the avatar that informs these elements of the story, right? So it's, which I think is a much more esoteric understanding of the similarities, right? Because you can go back into Hindu mythology, which predates all of the Greek stuff, and find similar aspects, to the stories of avatars. Okay, we need a reader.
Joan, can you read that for us, please?
The legend of the Dionysiac or Bacchic Mysteries recites that Dionysos Zegrios was a son of Zeus or Jupiter, whom he had begotten in the form of a dragon upon the virgin Kore Persephonia, whom older myths have made the same as Demeter or Ceres, reputed to be her mother in the Eleusinian story. It was the purpose of Zeus to place the son thus obtained upon the throne of Olympus. But the 7 Titans surprised the young child and tore him in pieces. His heart was rescued by Athena and swallowed by Zeus, by whom he was again begotten and again made the heir of the universe. All these scenes were commemorated, each Mista being sworn to secrecy, and at the end, the Hierophant chanted, "I have escaped calamity. I have found the better lot." This is the same proclamation as was made by the bride at the nuptial ceremony, and indeed the idea of a sacred marriage is conveyed by the rites of initiation. Those who are initiated sing, "I have eaten from the drum. I have drank from the basin cymbal, bearing the earthen cup. I have gone to the nuptial chamber." In his relation to the Son as Lord of Heaven, Demiurge and Father of creation, Bacchus was denominated Puripesi, or Son of Fire, and was represented with the phallic symbolism, as was Zeus by that of a serpent, denoting the essential spirit that preceded all things. Hence, in the mystic Sista, or ark, which was opened to the view of the Apopta, or seer, were exhibited the egg, the phallus, and the serpent, typifying the primal essence, the demiurgic power, and the organic substance, which is rendered operative, thus constituting a symbolism as lofty in sentiment or as gross in sense as is the mind of the person witnessing the spectacle. And then that little footnote, therefore, in the mysteries of Dionysos, it is usual to consecrate an egg as representing that which generates and contains all things in itself.
Yeah, so there was a recognition in the apopta or seer of the universal egg, right? The source of all. So any thoughts or questions about this? There's some, yeah.
Martha's got her hand up. Go ahead.
I was just seeing all this that, you know, that isn't the truth about, I think of the interplay among the rays, the destruction of resurrection, of harmony, of, and that the fabulists were, regardless of what tradition, were really struggling to understand the meaning of the universe. And so while the blind is that it appears so completely psychological and on the astral plane, but they're really working to penetrate what is the truth of this cosmos we live in, it seems to me.
Well, you know, you talk about the fabulists. You have to look at the source, always look at the source. You know, yes, it could be that they're struggling to know the mysteries and find a language by which that could be described. Alternatively, they know full well the mysteries because they're masters or high initiates, and that they meticulously use the language of mythology to veil and yet reveal at the same time those higher mysteries. And, you know, HPB tells us that it's verified by DK that these mysteries have 7 keys. That is, they exist on 7 levels. So you can see them, you know, like so many mythologers do. You know, it always astonishes me that there are academicians who will spend their whole life studying these and have no idea that they have any higher meaning, and they don't accept that they have a higher meaning. You know, they just say, well, they're just metaphors for the natural world. You know, they call Persephone the wheat, you know, buried in the ground. Well, yeah, but that itself is a metaphor, you know, for rebirth, etc. Right? And then some have, you know, give a psychological key where they see it all in terms of human psychology. And it's useful at that level, because if it's a truly well-crafted myth, which always comes from the intuition, it will work at every level, right? But at the higher levels, at the esoteric levels, it literally reveals the higher realities and the higher doctrines. And that's, you know, what I believe was taught in these mystery schools, right? You know, you could have stopped any Greek citizen on the street and they could have told you, you know, the actual myth and some of its most basic meanings. But you would have had to go into the mystery schools in order to learn the higher.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Francis. That's helpful. That would be true for astrology then also.
Yeah, pretty much any teaching that has an esoteric side to it, you know, it would have that, you know. That's why, you know, it's so important to choose your source. You know, I vet the sources that I present to you, you know, certain like Thomas Taylor I give preeminence, this source is a very high source. Knight is the last name of this guy. But it's not as clear and what you might call intuitive as Taylor, but then nobody is that I've found, who actually published. MPH himself has a very powerful intuition, but it's important because otherwise you're just reading, something out of the understanding of whatever level you're reading, no matter how astute it may come across. You have to gauge the consciousness of the writer, and their willingness to understand it at a higher level. That's always the case. Anyway, okay,
And
yeah.
I just wanted to mention, since we were making the allegory with Christ's life and Bacchus, this here describes the Eucharist.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And don't you have to marvel at this great urn from 4th century BC? I mean, just the fact that it stayed intact, right? It's pretty extraordinary in itself. I mean, this was around and was fashioned by these people, by this school. This isn't after the fact. And for that reason, I think it's quite astonishing.
Lynn, you have your hand up?
Yes, Francis, do you have a clue as to the faces that are at the top, the holders?
Yeah, I would say that they would be the great Greek masters like Orpheus and Bacchus. Now, these artifacts don't come with instructions, right? You have to determine yourself. In this case, this face looks very much like this face. So you have to determine whether it's just the same represented, if I was going to guess, I would say in this case, it would be Bacchus, right? And, you also have to see these in terms of energies, this relationship between the masculine and feminine energy form. But there's much more to be said, and we just ran out of time. So we will continue next month, and it's going to be again on the second Sunday. I believe it's the 9th of May. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm really hoping that I have time to, I have what's left of my presentation so far, and I hope I will have time. I'll make time because, as you know, the annual conference is we're right close to it, just a couple of weeks away. And I hope that you'll take a look and sign up if you haven't. Take a look at it. It's by donation, recommended donation. So there's going to be some tremendous speakers. I'll be giving 3 presentations, and you'll be giving a presentation, won't you?
Yes, in the astrology pre-workshop.
Right. So yeah, check it out. You could find it at. Can you put a link in the box in our last minute?
I'll have to dig for it, but
yeah, that's all right.
Just Google the 7th Ray Institute or 7th Ray Conference, and it will come up. So
I think it's the 35th conference, right? 35th, isn't that right? I believe so. So that if you add that,
it's the conference is on the great illumined, brilliant 5th ray, enlightening and initiating humanity.
Yeah, it's going to be
URL is 7ray.org.
Okay.
Thank you.
7ray.org. 7ray.org. That's the go-to place, and it'll come right up. So it's going to be great, and you can, because it's online, you can come and go as you please and get involved with what you're specifically interested in. And it's a recommended donation, so money should not be a reason for not participating. And let's see, Secret Doctrine webinar is in 2 weeks.
Next week.
Next week. Yikes. Okay. It's
Yeah,
already
because we're already, yeah, this is already the second.
second.
So
So
the 18th of April, next week, next Sunday, same bat time, same bat channel, as we used to say in the 60s, was it? Anyway,
okay.
7 p.m. GMT, 18th. So
All right. So hope to see you all there. And thanks for attending. It's, it's really a privilege for me to host these. I've really enjoyed it so far. So see you then, and take care until then.
Thank you all.
bye, everybody.
Bye.